Welcome to the deep dive. We're tackling a really complex and often quite painful subject today. We're starting with a story that really just grabs you.
Hmm.
Imagine being in a relationship. It feels like a dream at first, but then it just spirals into this nightmare of control, manipulation, even physical danger.
Yeah.
That's the reality described for Jason, whose experience with someone he calls Lana is, well, it's the powerful opening to the material we're looking at.
And his story is, wow, incredibly intense. He talks about how that initial deception turned into physical abuse, the constant gaslighting, making him doubt himself,
Mm.
his own sanity,
Yeah.
even false charges filed against him, dragging him through the courts. He mentioned specific shocking details like getting stabbed with their keys.
It's brutal. And he was so entangled, right? Living with her parents at one point, feeling totally unable to break free, even when his own family was saying, get out.
He felt trapped. He uses the phrase, winding more tightly into it and become a web of his own making.
And the actual breaking point, it wasn't even the physical assaults you mentioned. It was something quieter, almost more terrifying.
Right, that moment in the car.
Yeah.
Late at night, they're exhausted, and she just smacks him across the nose.
And in that moment, that desperation, he actually unbuckled his seatbelt and tried to throw himself out of the moving car.
He felt like death or serious injury was better than staying in that relationship. This is hard to comprehend, that level of desperation.
You're truly harrowing. And somehow she stopped him from jumping. But that near-death moment, that became the absolute wake-up call for him.
Yeah, he knew things had to change immediately.
He finally cut ties completely, changed his number, got legal protection, and then he started confronting what the source calls the junk hidden in his own heart that allowed him to get into that situation in the first place.
And the source uses this really intense story not just as an extreme case, but to illustrate a concept it explores deeply.
Soul ties.
Soul ties. Okay, these powerful bonds between people. Sometimes they're healthy, but often, as in this story, they can become deeply unhealthy, toxic even, trapping us.
Okay, so let's really unpack this. Our deep dive today is based on excerpts from the book Breaking Soul Ties, Freedom from the Root of Toxic Relationships by Dr. Stennis and Jennifer Clark with Jason Clark.
Hmm.
And our mission here is to distill the core ideas from this material. What are these soul ties according to the source? How do they form? What impact do they have? And crucially, what's the suggested process for breaking free from the unhealthy ones?
Right. And before we dive into the ties themselves, the source lays some groundwork, talks about our inner architecture.
Inner architecture.
Yeah, the idea that a human being is composed of spirit, soul, and body. And understanding that framework is apparently key to seeing how these unhealthy ties can get such a strong grip on us.
Okay, spirit, soul, and body. And the soul in this view is our mind, our will, and our emotions.
Exactly. That's presented as the core of our personality, how we engage with the world, with each other.
So not just abstract concepts.
No, very much the functional core. And the source posits that the original design, let's say, was for perfect harmony. Our thoughts, will, emotions aligned with God's.
Okay.
Our emotions weren't just meant to be our own feelings. They were intended as conduits, ways to express God's emotions like love, joy, peace, what the source connects to the fruit of the Spirit.
But then, according to the source, sin disrupted this.
Right. It wasn't just a moral slip-up. It caused a spiritual death, a separation from that intended connection with God. So instead of the Spirit leading in alignment with the divine, humans became ruled by what it calls the flesh or the carnal nature.
And that shift had emotional consequences.
Huge ones, according to this framework. It led directly to experiencing and being driven by toxic emotions. Fear, anger, guilt, shame. Think of Adam and Eve in this story. After the fall, they didn't walk with God. They ran and hid. That's presented as this fundamental emotional shift.
So the harmony's broken. And even when someone becomes born again, spiritually renewed, the source emphasizes this ongoing internal conflict.
Yes, the carnal nature, the flesh, it still wars against the spirit. It uses the analogy of oil and water.
Ah, okay, they don't mix.
Exactly. They're seen as constantly opposing each other. Makes it difficult to consistently live out the spirit's desires.
And it's this internal conflict, this sort of fractured inner architecture that creates the vulnerability for these unhealthy connections, these soul ties.
Precisely. The source defines these ungodly soul ties as bonds formed through agreement.
Agreement meaning?
Alignment in thought, will, or emotion, basically.
Oh.
Or through ungodly associations, connections that can ultimately take us captive.
Okay. So how do these typically form, according to the book?
Well, several key ways are outlined. One is simply making bad choices in companionship. who you spend your time with, who you align with.
Mm.
It matters deeply because connections form at that soul level.
Right. Seems straightforward, but it sounds like it's more than just being influenced externally.
It's about the internal bonding, yeah.
Mm.
Another major way is harboring toxic emotions.
Like what specifically?
Unforgiveness is a big one. Hate, deep wounds, anger. The source uses that parable from Matthew 18, the unforgiving servant.
Oh, yeah. The one forgiven a huge debt, but wouldn't forgive a tiny one.
Exactly. And the consequence. He was handed over to be tortured. The source interprets this not just as external punishment, but the internal state of being tormented by that unforgiveness.
Wow.
Refusing to forgive, in this view, effectively puts you in a cage. It creates a soul tie to that person through the offense, through the bitterness. You're still bound to them.
So holding on to it keeps you stuck, connected in a negative way. What about manipulation?
The source actually frames manipulation as a form of witchcraft.
Whoa, strong term.
It is.
Yeah.
Using people for personal gain or control, like befriending someone just because they might help you get ahead at work. That's seen as using people in an ungodly way, which in this framework gives legal ground for negative spiritual influence and forms ties based on control, not genuine connection.
It even mentions witchcraft prayers. What's that about?
Yeah, that's praying with the intent to impose your will on someone else or manipulate an outcome, rather than seeking God's will. It's seen as trying to control through spiritual means, again, forming a tie based on manipulation.
That definitely adds a different layer to thinking about prayer and intention. Pride is also mentioned.
Yes, excessive pride. It can lead to what the source calls a soul tie with self.
A tie with yourself.
Kind of. When pride elevates the self above everything, you're essentially setting yourself up as my own God. And anything loved or prioritized more than that divine connection becomes an idol, according to this view. The idolatry creates a soul tie a bond to something other than God, whether it's yourself, success, whatever.
Okay. And then there's this idea of evil attraction.
This is a concept that, just like the Holy Spirit might connect people for good purposes, other spiritual forces, called seducing spirits in the text, can link people through ungodly desires. Lust, inappropriate emotional attachments.
So, like the examples given, the woman acting seductively or the man who felt creepy.
Right. Suggesting these aren't just psychological issues, but might have a spiritual dynamic facilitating these unhealthy connections, these unhealthy pulls.
And finally, codependency. That feels very relevant to toxic relationships.
Very much so. The source often links codependency back to unresolved issues from early childhood, insecure bonding, problems with separation.
And the characteristics are familiar.
Yeah. Substituting activities or helping for real intimacy, getting stuck in those one-sided roles like rescuer victim, caretaker dependent, denying problems, ignoring your own needs, needing to be needed, sometimes even using caretaking manipulatively.
It mentions partners can switch roles, too.
They can, yeah. It's seen as this bond rooted in dysfunction and unmet needs, not healthy mutual connection.
So these unhealthy ties, they're not just random bad luck. They can form through our choices. Our unresolved hurts, manipulation, pride, even these spiritual dynamics or deep patterns from childhood trauma like codependency.
Exactly. And underpinning all of this is the power of emotion. The source really emphasizes this. It even connects it to brain science, pointing out that the emotional center, the limbic system, is highly active in spiritual experiences.
So spirituality isn't just intellectual here. It involves the heart, too.
Precisely. And the source explores the biblical idea of the heart as more than just the organ. It's the innermost being mental, moral, emotional activity. It's described as the sphere of divine influence.
And it brings up that New Testament reference, sometimes translated as belly or gut.
Right, John 7:38. Out of the belly or gut will flow rivers of living water. This suggests, in the source's view, that our deepest spiritual connection is intertwined with our emotional, almost instinctual core.
Fascinating. So how do emotions, especially the toxic ones, keep these cycles going?
It talks about emocognition and emovolition. Think of emocognition as feeling thoughts. You feel frustrated, and bam, your mind jumps to everything wrong.
Okay, the feeling triggers the thought pattern.
And emovolition is the feeling choice loop. You feel angry, and you automatically lash out. The feeling drives the action, almost bypassing conscious thought.
Creating these self-perpetuating loops we get stuck in.
Exactly. They function automatically. And the source stresses that to break that loop, something from the outside must break into it. Spiritually, that's presented as connecting with God, allowing His presence to interrupt and change that automatic emotional process.
Bringing in an external force to change the dynamic makes sense. Building on emotions, the source also talks about bitter roots. How do they fit in?
A bitter root in this context, is like a deep-seated negative structure in your personality. It forms when a toxic emotion like unforgiveness or a deep hurt isn't dealt with and takes root in your heart.
So it grows like a weed.
Yeah, and produces poisonous fruit. Things like sinful judgments, chronic negative patterns, cycles of trouble in your life.
It's not just a past wound, it's actively causing ongoing problems.
Exactly. The source points to Hebrews 12, warning that a root of bitterness causes trouble and defiles many. And it interprets defiles many in a couple of ways. It can rob us of God's presence and power, grace, lead to these bitter harvests of recurring issues.
And it can even provoke others. How does that work?
It suggests that the unresolved bitterness inside us can unconsciously trigger negative responses from people around us. The examples given are like tragically abused children sometimes attracting abusers later, or wounded people pushing others away defensively, causing others to react badly.
Wow, that adds a really complex layer to relationships. And how do habits connect to these bitter roots?
The source suggests that really stubborn habits often have this negative emotional power driving them. In staying within its spiritual framework, it proposes these habits can sometimes have seducing spirits attached, especially if they involve ongoing sin, giving legal ground, so to speak.
And it also brings in some habit science.
It does, yeah. It discusses chunking, how the brain automates sequences of actions into routines, and the familiar trigger routine reward loop, the core habit mechanism.
Right, which shows habits are deeply wired, they change brain activity, they're hard to break. But crucially, they can be overridden by consciously changing the routine.
So the spiritual perspective and the scientific one both point to these being deep patterns but changeable ones.
Yes. And the source emphasizes something really interesting. Maybe the most important factor in changing a habit, even before identifying triggers or rewards, is believing that change is possible.
Belief comes first.
Seems so. Once you believe, then you identify the trigger, like location, time, emotion, people, the action right before, the routine itself, and the perceived reward you're getting.
And again, it links back to the spiritual saying that when God is allowed to break into the loop, change can happen very rapidly, even instantly sometimes.
Which brings us to the practical side. Finding freedom. According to the source, where do you start?
Honesty. That's presented as the absolute starting point.
Honesty in what way? With God about your fears, hurts, struggles. With others, transparency, seeking help. And critically, with yourself really committing to change, even facing fears you've been avoiding.
Okay. And this involves confronting passive behaviors too, like avoidance or manipulation.
Yes, recognizing things like anxiety-driven avoidance, or maybe using manipulation subtly, or constantly rescuing others to feel needed instead of dealing with your own stuff.
And the alternative is developing assertiveness.
Right. Learning to communicate directly. I want, I need, I feel. Using I statements, engaging in healthy negotiation, compromise, standing up for yourself.
And boundaries. That sounds fundamental here.
Absolutely non-negotiable, according to the source. Praying through past boundary violations against you, and also seeking forgiveness for times you've violated others' boundaries. Learning to handle conflict constructively, too, not just avoiding it or blowing up.
Going back to Jason's story, after he broke free from Lana, maintaining that freedom absolutely depended on strong boundaries, didn't it?
Totally. He realized he couldn't even be slightly friendly. The source suggests sometimes you have to be really blunt, create significant distance.
Reinforcing that idea that a toxic tie or a seducing spirit, in their terms, is always looking for an opening, any connection point to re-engage.
So not being welcoming was vital for him. And accountability, having someone who knows your struggle, is highlighted as crucial.
There's also that story about Susan, the woman in the on-again, off-again toxic relationship.
Right. Even after breaking up, she felt this intense magnetic pull back to him.
And when she prayed about it, sought spiritual help, she identified that pull not just as habit, but as something unclean, maybe demonic, attached to the soul tie. By consciously forgiving him and spiritually breaking the tie.
She felt the pull disappear instantly.
Instantly. A powerful anecdote within this framework.
The source also tackles sexual issues head-on, stating clearly that pornography creates soul ties.
Yes, even fantasy relationships through porn are seen as creating these bonds because it wires the brain's addiction pathway. The warning is that it can lead to losing interest in a real partner, needing fantasy for intimacy. There's even concern about future tech, like VR, making it worse.
So the approach isn't just behavior modification, it starts deeper.
Exactly. The source says, check the emotion first. Is it love or lust? And it strongly argues that spirit, good or evil, is stronger than willpower alone. Unresolved entry points from the past, wounds, unforgiveness, past sins, leave you vulnerable to ongoing negative spiritual pressure in this area.
How does it suggest dealing with specific sexual ties, or what it terms spiritual adultery?
Spiritual adultery refers to those intense emotional or spiritual attractions outside marriage that act like infidelity at the soul level.
Yeah.
The suggested process is quite specific. Think of the person, identify the feeling, attraction, excitement, receive forgiveness from God, forgive the other person, verbally break the soul tie, and consciously redirect your emotions back to God and, if married, your spouse.
Hmm. There's a caution mentioned too.
Yeah, about not letting this lead to unfounded suspicion in a marriage. And it notes these ties can persist even after divorce or death, needing conscious severing.
Wow. That shows how deep these connections are believed to go, beyond just the physical. But there's also a lot of hope offered, right? Especially for believers.
Definitely. The message is that changing these deep patterns isn't just about grit. It involves divine help, wisdom, healing, spiritual power.
And it connects this to brain plasticity.
Yes, the brain's ability to change. Neurons that fire together wire together. That principle.
Right.
Just as negative choices create pathways, positive choices in spiritual practices can actually remap the brain. It uses a case study, A, who struggled with unhealthy attractions linked to past issues. Through therapy separating aggression and sex brain maps, combined with his spiritual journey, he changed those patterns and formed a healthy marriage.
So the spiritual process and brain science are seen as working together for healing.
And connecting with God is presented as the catalyst. Opening your heart, allowing God into the loop of those automatic thoughts and emotions, is seen as transformative. Jennifer shares her experience of learning to drop down to her spirit.
Meaning shifting focus from troubled thoughts to God's presence within.
Exactly. In instantly feeling God's peace and joy, experiencing that divine love can fundamentally change how you see yourself and feel.
But the source is clear this isn't a solo journey.
Absolutely not. Being planted in a healthy church community is described as vital, like trees in a forest drawing strength and protection from each other.
Compared to being rootless like a tumbleweed if you're isolated.
Right. Accountability with a partner or group is seen as crucial for restoration and staying free.
And it does include stories of instantaneous deliverance, too.
Yes. Dennis shares personal accounts, instant freedom from drugs, alcohol. Seeing a family member freed from cigarettes instantly, though that person later struggled again, which highlights the need for ongoing commitment. So while instant deliverance is seen as possible, process and commitment are often needed too.
And for those really persistent, repetitive issues, the besetting sins.
The path involves several steps: forgiveness, cleansing, specifically breaking related soul ties, and praying through potential childhood roots. The resources mentioned, like a prayer journal or a 60-day challenge, suggest a structured approach.
So the overall message seems to be one of significant hope, doesn't it?
Definitely. That through facing these invisible dynamics, these ties, and actively engaging with spiritual truth and community support, real restoration and lasting freedom are possible.
So this deep dive, it's really opened up a fascinating framework from this source, how our inner architecture, our emotions, habits are all tied up with these powerful connections, these soul ties that can really hold us captive.
Yeah. And it lays out a path to freedom. It involves honesty, boundaries, actively breaking unhealthy bonds, and relying on both divine help and community.
It presents freedom, lasting transformation, not just as, a nice idea, but as an intended outcome when you confront these truths and seek alignment with the divine, as the source describes it. And as we wrap up, the source leaves us with this idea of unevangelized areas of the heart, parts of our inner life emotions, thoughts that haven't fully surrendered to or aren't yet operating under what the source sees as divine authority and truth.
Yeah.
It really makes you think, what areas of your own heart, your own inner world might still be operating outside that authority? And what might that be costing you right now in terms of peace or healthy connection or just genuine freedom? Something to really mull over after exploring this material.